Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of The Root of the Matter. I am your host, Dr. Rachaele Carver. And on this podcast, we talk a lot about how oral health is connected to systemic health. And one of the overall arching tenets of health in general is nutrition. So, on this month's solo podcast with me, we are going to talk about all things nutrition. If you've been listening to the podcast for a while, I talk a ton about minerals, fat soluble vitamins, B vitamins. And I think those are the three main categories that are absolutely vital for overall health. So we'll dive into a little bit about that. We'll talk a little bit about different fats, right? We need to talk about the macronutrients, proteins, fats, carbohydrates. We'll talk a little bit about anti-nutrients. So, what's the deal with oxalates and lectins, and how does that throw a wrench into nutrition? And what about the different eating styles, right? Low carb, bioenergetics. We've talked about carnivore, vegan, keto, all those different things and how they can impact us. And then we'll also talk a little bit about some of the powerhouse foods. But I want to finish today's podcast by talking about one part of nutrition that I think is even more maybe than what we're putting in our mouths. And that's what I call soul nutrition, right? So sometimes, even if we're eating the best diets, we're exercising and all this, if we don't have the human connection, if we don't feel that there is a purpose to our life here on this planet, then sometimes it doesn't matter exactly what you're eating or how much you're doing on a physical component. We really need to have that spiritual, emotional nutrition just as much as we need the actual food. So we'll dive into a little bit about that at the end. So let's just jump right in here. As I mentioned, right, the minerals, our calcium, our phosphorus, our magnesium, zinc, copper, all of those minerals are absolutely vital for every cellular process. So when we're thinking about health, we've talked a lot about detox and drainage and all these things and toxins. It's coming down to that cellular level. How well are our mitochondria working, right? Our mitochondria are really responsible for creating energy in the body. When we don't have energy in the body, none of our bodily processes will function properly, right? And at end of life, what is happening? Basically, we're all out of energy, right? The energy flowing stops in our body and we go off to whatever the next realm is, whatever you believe in. So, how do we keep having enough energy? How do we get that energy flowing? We have to make sure our mitochondria are working properly. And we need all sorts of nutrients, right, in order to make our enzymes work properly, to be able to detox, be able to think properly. Everything has to work well. So, there's been so much talk about all these different diet styles. And the really important thing to understand is that each of us is unique. We are unique from our spouse, unique from our children, our parents. So that sometimes can make it difficult when you're trying to feed a family, right? Because maybe all of us have a little bit different nutrient requirements when you really look deep down into it. I was recently listening to a podcast about genomics, and the science in this area is just fascinating. And it's really come leaps and bounds in the last decade. I know years and years ago, I ran my DNA and my family's DNA trying to understand these little, polymorphisms or SNPs. A lot of people have heard of MTHFR. It's probably the most popular SNP that we've heard of. And people say, oh, I have MTFR, right? And they think, oh, it's so terrible. It means I can't really detox well, because methylation is a very important function of our enzymes to be able to metabolize things properly, to detox things properly. So if we have these genetic polymorphisms, or SNPs as they're called, then we have weakened ability to detox. For example, if you have one copy, and again, MTHFR is broken into, there's A category, a C category, but let's just be general for now. This is not a genetic discussion. The way I try to explain it is, if you have one copy, then your enzymes that allow methylation work at 70% of optimal. If you have two copies, you're lucky, like both of my daughters, you only function at 30% capacity. So the way I explain that to my girls is, for every 10 toxins that are coming into your body, you can only get rid of 3 7 of those toxins are getting stored in your fat, in your bones, in your brain, in your nervous system. I'm trying to impress on them that's why we don't have to be worried about that, but we know that we have to take extra precautions with our food and supplements to support our body's ability to methylate. And again, almost 50% of the population has one or both of these SNPs. And I started thinking, trying to make myself feel better that my kids got the crap genetic lottery here is, well, why would that? Why would evolution select for that? If that's so terrible to have such poor detox, why would both my kids? That really beats genetic odds. And I started to think about like the canary in the coal mine. Because if we don't detox well, we are going to have symptoms much sooner. So you're going to have the skin rashes or upset stomach, or who knows? It can manifest in so many different ways because we're all unique. But the sooner a symptom becomes noticeable, the sooner we're going to try to go after and figure out what's going on. So that's the way there's no science behind that. This is just my way of thinking that why would evolution allow that to happen? And so I feel like with my eczema, when I got that 16 years ago, I was able to immediately go after it and try to figure out what was going on versus just trying to take steroids just to suppress it, right? So, anyway, all those of you with MTHFR, think of it as actually maybe it's an evolutionarily good thing because we're so surrounded by 80 plus thousand toxins today. The sooner we maybe develop some kind of symptom, the sooner we're able to really investigate what's going on and hopefully support our body to get rid of all these toxins. Should we dive into maybe some of the different eating styles? So, low carb became very, very popular because as soon as you go on low carb, most people will lose weight initially and they feel better. And we have to think about what carbs are, right? So many of the processed foods we're eating are carbs. So, when you embark on a low carb journey, most of the time you are removing a lot of toxic, processed, nutrient deficient foods. And that can probably be said of almost every diet. Anytime you change your eating style because you have a symptom, because you want to lose weight, you're tired, whatever it may be, you're automatically going to feel better initially because you are removing whatever that stimulus is from making you feel poorly. So it could be, and I've tried one of my eczema, I tried every diet under the sun. And the only thing that really helped me initially was doing a little bit of fasting. And I think, again, same reason I was taking that burden of all the carbs that were causing inflammation, right? The processed foods, whatever it was, causing inflammation, causing an overgrowth of the bacteria, or my big thing was parasites, right? So causing an overgrowth of those bugs that were then leading to inflammation. So that really helped quite a bit. But long term, especially as a woman who was in her 30s and I'm cycling, carbohydrates are absolutely vital for health. The brain and the liver, their primary source of fuel is glucose, which comes from carbohydrates. So you guys have maybe heard me talk about my brother-in-law embarked on the carnivore diet starting in the January of 24, lost 160 pounds. His cardiologist has been floored because his blood work has never looked so good. He had a heart attack at 25. So he's been being followed by the same doctor for 25 years. And the doctor is just amazed. And again, removing all of the toxic processed foods. There's just this feeling and fear in the majority of the population that meat is so bad, that meat is carcinogenic, and meat is going to cause you to have a heart attack. In fact, one of his colleagues said that to him the other day. Oh my gosh, you're crazy. You're going to die of a heart attack. But again, he's never been healthier, had more energy. Any ailment he ever had, I said on one podcast, he said his gums stopped bleeding, right? He's no matter what he ever tried to do, brushing and flossing, nothing ever mattered. Changed, got rid of all the toxins. Now his gums healed. And I was like, exactly. I was like, this is what I want everyone to understand. When we remove the toxic byproducts and we put back in the nutrients, the body can heal from almost anything. That we just want to catch things in an early enough stage before we have too much degeneration where it becomes more and more problematic. So this is where that now a newer kind of trend, I don't necessarily want to call it a trend, but there's been more information about the bioenergetic theory of eating, which again is balancing those macronutrients. So that's your fats, your carbs, and your protein. We know protein is absolutely essential to create health, right? We need protein to build our muscles, to build other proteins in the body so everything can work well. And it's different for men and women. So this is the other tricky thing in nutrition. So much of nutrition research in the past has always been on men, and women are not small men. We are completely different. And the fasting works amazing for men, especially. Most men can lose weight, 10 pounds in a week, if not more. But our women's bodies aren't like that, right? If we overfast, which is really common, I was a victim of this myself, and under eating, especially for women, that really throws our cycles off. Like we need those carbohydrates in order to make our progesterone and estrogen, all those really important. Why do we crave right before our cycle? Why do we crave sugar? Because we need those carbohydrates in order to make our hormones. If we're eating low carb for too long, right, then all of our hormone over time, our body starts to break down. We start to break down more muscle. We can't lose the weight anymore, right? Because your body's, oh my gosh, you're starving. Let's go into storage mode. So this is the problem when we over fast. And again, I was big on this, and this really happened to me. Once I started incorporating, making sure I was eating my breakfast before 11 o'clock, I had way more energy. I could get through the day much more easily. And I didn't realize how much I was under eating. And so I was working with a practitioner, and he had me doing Chronometer. So that's just a great little app. I think there are several out there, but Chronometer is a very popular one. And you can plug in what you eat over the day, and it will give you an idea of how much fat, protein, and carbohydrates. And again, everybody's a little different, but and depending on your activity level, right? Obviously, if you're very active, if you're an athlete, you're going to need more carbohydrates to supply that after you work out. We deplete all of the glycogen and glucose because our muscles use it really quickly. So, this is why when we go for a walk after we eat or do any kind of physical activity, that excess. So, let's say you had breakfast with pancakes and syrup and maybe whipped cream, lots of sugar, right? And coffee with lots of sugar, your blood glucose is going to be super high from that meal. But if you go and on a walk immediately after, those muscles are going to uptake that glucose, and it'll keep your blood glucose at a better level. We can't all be perfect all the time, but that's a really simple strategy for trying to keep blood sugar stable, because unstable blood sugar is a leading problem with chronic disease today. Many of us, it doesn't necessarily have to be somebody who's overweight. Even myself, sometimes I struggle with that blood sugar instability. And what I've learned is that I need to eat a little bit of fat or fiber and protein before I have a carbohydrate. I was using a blood glucose monitor to try to understand, because my HbA1c, which is a measure of blood glucose over 3 months, was ticking up a little bit. And I was like, ugh. When I started eating carbohydrates again, my body it hadn't stabilized, right? And so I was like, no carbs, and all of a sudden a lot of carbs, right? My body, it takes a little bit of time to adapt. And so what I learned by watching my blood sugar and what I was eating is that if you have, again, something fatty, so I might have a couple of nuts, or I might take a swig of my cod liver oil first thing in the morning, and then, or have butter. I put the butter in with my eggs. And then the protein, right? Or fiber, right? So it can be vegetables. Sometimes I'll grab a thing of like pea pods, or I have a couple of raw carrots, just a little bit of fiber that will slow down the breakdown of the glucose into the bloodstream, so you don't get that spike. Because when you get that spike, then you release the insulin, which brings it down. And that's why sometimes after a really heavy sugary meal, we get exhausted, right? Because we've now crashed our blood sugar and we're very tired. So that's a really good strategy. And that works for most people, right? Of keeping that blood sugar low. So always try to eat your meal. Always try to eat your veggies first and leave the carbs for the last part of the meal. So that should be a good tip there. So why do people feel so good on the ketogenic diet? So this is a very high fat diet. It's used therapeutically for like people with dementia, people with high inflammatory things. Again, what are we removing? Removing the highly toxic, highly processed, carbohydrates, right? The chips and the crackers and the granola bars and all of these kind of things that are just laden with all sorts of pesticides and even some anti-nutrients, which we'll talk about in a minute. But again, long term on that is not also a great strategy, right? Initially, we are going to take away that processed foods, right? Let that inflammation come down. get back to a more stable point. And now we've got to go back to balancing all those macronutrients. And a lot of times, why we feel so good eating all those fats at first, it's actually creating a little bit of a stress to the body. So we're increasing our cortisol. The more cortisol in our body, we always think as cortisol is a bad thing, but not having enough cortisol is also not good. So when our cortisol goes up, it decreases inflammation, right? So those of us who are dealing with chronic ailments have high inflammation. So you go on a keto diet, your cortisol levels shoot through the roof, and for a little bit, you're like, ooh, I feel better, right? This cortisol is counteracting all that inflammation that's been going around in my body. But we can use up that cortisol, right? And then we can dive down into that low cortisol, which is also a problem, right? If you're waking up in the morning is when our cortisol is low and it starts to rise as soon as we wake up and then levels off during the day and then gets really low at night. So why do people tend to have more pain at night, especially tooth pain? It's very much more common at night. And this was actually explained to me by my uncle, who's a physician. He's the reason that is because your cortisol is lower. So again, cortisol decreases inflammation, right? Why do we use hydrocortisone creams? We're decreasing those rashes and getting that inflammation down. So at night, when their cortisol is lower, you have aches. If you wake up in the morning with aches and pains, you're in a low cortisol state, right? So are there other things that we have to do to balance that? And yes, that's a whole nother discussion of how do we balance the adrenals and kidneys and all that. But just again, knowing that that's why sometimes we feel really good right before that. How about a vegan diet? It's common perception that vegetables are so good. So vegan because you're not eating this animal protein, that it should be healthiest diet on the planet. If you dive into the research though, vegans are very deficient in the fat soluble vitamins. And as if you've been listening to me say it over and over again, the minerals, the fat soluble vitamins are the crucial building blocks for everything in the body. And although you can get vitamin A in vegetables, really people think, oh, eat your carrots for your vitamin A. But in a carrot is beta carotene. Beta carotene needs to be converted by enzymes in the body to vitamin A. And there are a lot of people, the genetic SNPs, myself included, who do not convert beta carotene very efficiently to vitamin A. So if you happen to be one of those people, you can eat carrots till you're literally orange in the skin, and you may not be making enough vitamin A. Vitamin A is absolutely it's just crucial for bone development, for eye development, it just goes on and on. Really important. And I see a lot of my vegan clients have very poor dental health, right? They don't have enough of the vitamin D. You cannot get the type of fat soluble vitamins that our body needs from plants. It's much more challenging. So you have to supplement. And it's very hard to supplement vitamin A. Most supplements contain retinol palmitate, not retinol. So you have to have cod liver oil or pure liver to actually get that type of vitamin A. Most supplements do not have the right form. So again, very problematic there. Vitamin K also, right, comes from the most highest amount comes from grass-fed dairy. And yes, there are vegetables that have the vitamin K, green leafy vegetables, but the levels are so much lower than what we find in animal products. Interestingly, when I was researching a little for the podcast, I looked up the liver, the nutrient dense. So the most nutrient dense on the planet food is liver. And back in the day, our grandparents used to eat liver all the time. It was very common. Even for me, I'm like the thought of it, even though I know it doesn't taste that bad when you cook it properly, is just in my head. I think, oh, so I take liver capsules because I got to get it. I got to get it some way. But I also, you can buy liver and grind it up with your ground beef. It's an awesome way to get it into your kids' diet, right? If you make, we probably make tacos at least once a week in my house. I've also started to make gyro meat, my own homemade gyro meat with ground lamb and ground beef. You can put a little bit of liver in that. And when you have all those, when you're making stuff like that with all those herbs and spices, you don't taste that at all. So that's an awesome way to get it in your diet. But I found this on this little chart that was comparing the nutrition of apples, carrots, red meat, and beef liver. And we'll put a link in the show notes, but it was on Chris Kresser, chriskresser.com, nature's most nutritious superfood. So what are the nutrients they list? Calcium, very important for teeth and bones, right? Calcium is a really important mineral that controls a lot of intracellular health and the balance between calcium and potassium. These are all really important for good energy flow through our cells. So an apple has 3 milligrams of calcium, carrots, 100 grams, 3.3 milligrams. Red meat has 11, and beef liver also has 11. So almost 3 times or almost 4 times as much calcium in meat than in a fruit and a vegetable. And we tend to think that, again, the common perception is that fruits and vegetables are the best foods on the planet. And yes, they are healthy, right? Because they have fiber, they have some antioxidants, some of the brightly colored things have all these polyphenols that we know are really important for fighting cancer and inflammation. They're really important for our mitochondria and producing energy. But interesting, okay? People think red meat is so bad for you. And again, this is from the media and all these misinformation, whatever you want to call it. But we have the data here. The data is very clear. How about phosphorus, another important mineral? And an apple has 6 milligrams. Carrots have 31 milligrams. Red meat, 140. And beef liver has 476 milligrams of phosphorus in 100 grams. All of this is 100 grams. How about magnesium? Magnesium, I talk about magnesium all the time. Most of us are super deficient in magnesium. It's responsible for almost 600 different enzymatic reactions in the body. And with all of the toxins flying around all the time, not to mention the stress and the Wi-Fi and all the things going on in our life, we are depleting magnesium at a really impressive rate. When I see a lot of tartar buildup on people's teeth, that's telling me there's a calcium imbalance, right? We need magnesium. We need vitamin A. We need vitamin K and D. We need all of those to bring that calcium into the teeth and bones versus precipitating out on the teeth or in the arteries. Because when I see a lot of calculus and tartar on the teeth, I'm worried that there's buildup in the arteries. So magnesium, magnesium, magnesium. So in an apple, we've got 4.8 grams, carrots, 6.2 milligrams, red meat, 15, and beef liver, 18. Okay, so almost 5 times the amount of magnesium in liver versus an apple. Iron, obviously, we know red meat has a lot of iron, but let's look at vitamin A. There's no vitamin A in an apple. There's no vitamin A in carrots. Okay, like I just said, carrots have beta carotene. They don't have vitamin A. So there's 40 international units in red meat and 53,000 in beef liver, because liver is really amazing for storing those fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K. It has a lot of B12, folic acid, copper, iron. It's very nutrient dense. Let's look down here at folate, right? Folate is a B vitamin, really important, especially in pregnant women. We talk a lot about folic acid, but we got to be careful because there are some people with genetic variations that folic acid is actually very detrimental for you. People with MTHFR, you have to be careful with folic acid. And folic acid is added to almost every kit, every cereal product, every granola product. So, like my children who are homozygous for that, folic acid is actually very detrimental. They need folate, not this folic acid, which is a synthetic chemical added to a lot of products here. So in folate in an apple, we've got 8 micrograms, and in beef liver, 145. And again, very interesting. So it lists, let's see, we've got calcium, phosphorus, magnesium, potassium, iron, zinc, copper, vitamin A, D, E, C. Vitamin C, this is really interesting. 7 milligrams of vitamin C in an apple, 27 in beef liver. Would you even think there's vitamin C in liver? I don't think most of us tend to think of liver having that, right? Then we have all the B vitamins: thiamine, riboflavin, niacin, pantothenic acid, vitamin B6, folate, biotin, and B12. Liver has every single one of those nutrients. The apples and the carrots do not have every single one of those. So again, when we're thinking about meat versus fruits and vegetables, you get much more nutrient density in quality meat. And it's tricky too, right? Because we know the best, highest quality meat is going to be grass-fed, organic meat, which is challenging sometimes to find, and it can be more expensive. So we just got to think, what are our priorities? Is our health a priority? Is the health of our children a priority? So maybe we're going to spend a little bit more money on the grass-fed beef and maybe not have the Starbucks every day. I don't know. It's tricky, and there is zero judgment here. It can be challenging again because some of these things are organic, and that's why we like to think you can't always buy organic for everything, but you don't always need to. That's why the Environmental Working Group every single year comes out with the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15. So the typically berries, anything with a really thin skin, right? Apples, peppers, berries. Typically, the pesticides put on conventionally grown produce, it will absorb through. So you're going to have more pesticides in those kind of foods. But something like broccoli or a banana, right? Banana has a nice thick skin. You don't need to buy organic bananas. So really print those, look those up and print those sheets out. And if you can only pick and choose, then go off of those lists. It's great. And and again, if you do some more of the meat, that can tend to be a little bit more expensive. Now, eggs always used to be so inexpensive, such a nutrient dense food, but now with the bird flu, it's gotten a little crazy. So if you have the land, try raising a few chickens. It's pretty easy. Great. We've got 71 incubating right now, and my sister-in-law's next door. So that's pretty exciting. We eat a lot of eggs here, especially with my brother-in-law and sister-in-law, both doing carnivore diet all the time. They eat meat, eggs, and cheese. And again, healthier than they've ever been in their entire lives. Other thing we want to talk about is seed oils. We've had a couple of episodes on the podcast about seed oils. We've heard me talk a lot about that, the omega-6 versus omega-3. They're called essential fatty acids because our bodies don't make them. We need to eat these. The omega-3s we know are like the cod liver oil. The omega-6s are all of the seeds, right? The sunflower, the safflower, the canola, corn oil, soybean oils. Those they oxidize really quickly. So we've mentioned before, which is really important to note, never buy anything that's fatty or acidic in a plastic bottle because anything that's acidic or fatty can leach the plastics into our foods. That's another huge thing we're seeing in the world today. It's all of us are absolutely loaded with microplastics. And that is absolutely detrimental to hormone health as well as lots of other chronic inflammatory issues. So always look for the glass bottle. If you buy it in bulk, pour it into your own. You can buy mason jars pretty cheap. Pour it into another bottle and keep it. And preferably, you also want it in a dark colored glass bottle, right? Because light, even if it's in a glass bottle, but it's a clear glass bottle, any type of light, especially artificial light, is going to cause oxidation. So one of the problems with these seed oils is that it's oxidized before we even consume it. And it's oxidized fats that create a lot of havoc and a ton of inflammation in our body, really problematic. The reason it's so prevalent now in foods is because it makes foods last longer, which again isn't necessarily a good thing. If that food is never breaking down, what is it even made of? But this is how we have shelf stable things. But if you're really concerned about health and eating well, you really want to avoid that. What should you be cooking with? Cook with ghee, cook with tallow, cook with butter. I wouldn't cook high heats with olive oil, but a good quality olive oil. That's the other thing you have to really look, where's your olive oil coming from? A lot of times they're all dumped together and it may be pretty contaminated. So there's some really good ones out of California, but again, be discerning when you look at where those are coming from. And again, make sure you buy it in a dark bottle that's glass. So you'll prevent some of that oxidation beforehand. Coconut oil is something I use a lot in my baking. That works really well. Coconut oil can be antifungal. You don't want to overdo it. Again, with anything, you don't want to overdo it. That's why I always have ghee. I always have tallow. I always have butter. I have a variety. Sometimes I'll put the coconut oil in my tea in the morning. So rotating to get the different kinds of saturated fats. But saturated fats have been vilified for far too long. Again, I have some podcasts about this, so go back if you want to learn a little bit more in depth about that. But that is what every cell in our body, the lining is cholesterol, right? It is fats. So we need to have those really healthy fats in order for our nutrients to be brought into the cells and for the toxins to be pushed out. When we have too many omega-6, the lining of our cells becomes rubbery. We can't absorb nutrients and we can't let the toxins out. So that's really becomes a problem. Really interesting too. Let's talk a little bit about fats because we're always so worried. We can't eat fats. We can't have high cholesterol because that's going to cause us to have a heart attack. The science is very clear, although the media and the majority of us don't really understand the science, or we haven't even ever heard the science. It's fortunate, even our doctors haven't really looked at the research there. We're always so worried when our LDL, we call that the bad cholesterol, when that gets high, so many doctors are immediately wanting to put us on statins. We got to lower that. And I'm always thinking, let's be smart about this. Like, why would the body be producing more LDL? And as I've mentioned many times before, it's when we have little damages or tears in that endothelial lining, the LDL acts as a band aid. It's supposed to go over, heal that little tear or the damage. And then the HDL, right, this good cholesterol, comes by and then dissolves the rest of that clot and everything is hunky dory. However, when we are constantly injuring our endothelial layer, because again, it's one cell layer thick, just like the gut, very easily can be damaged by all sorts of toxins, heavy proteins, sticky blood, right? Then we're constantly having the high LDL. But again, as if you guys listened to my last solo podcast, we talked about that endothelial dysfunction and that the high LDL, high cholesterol, high blood pressure is a result of the endothelial dysfunction, not the cause. So, really important. So, other thing to really understand about LDL, another reason, one of the main reasons it's also very high is when we have a lot of endotoxins. So many of us are walking around with parasitic infections, bacterial infections, fungal infections, and they're low grade. So we don't necessarily have a ton of symptoms, or maybe we don't really relate them because we get so used to having digestive upset and so used to having a little bit of gas here and there. My eczema, so many people, every other commercial on TV now is for a skin rash drug. So it just becomes so normal and we don't think about it as being bad because it's just so common now. But all of those are signs of infections, right? And so these infections, again, I mentioned a lot about this in the last solo podcast about these endotoxins and how they specifically damage areas in the body. But these endotoxins, it's the LDL, which is actually binds on to these endotoxins to try to get them out of the body. So if you are seeing on blood work an increase in free fatty acids, an increase in triglycerides, an increase in LDL, that we should be thinking about what kind of infection do I have? And then we should be doing further work of maybe a stool test or an organic acid test, some kind of tox screen to look for. Is it mold toxins? Is it bacterial toxin? We need to know parasitic toxins, fungal. What is the infection that is causing these? So instead of just boom, let's put you on a statin. So now if we reduce that LDL, we do not have that carrier now to grab onto that toxin to get it out of the body. So now we have all these toxins and now no way to get rid of them. And this is a real problem. This is why I talk about binders a lot. I think binders are absolutely vital in today's world. I take several every single day. I give it to my kids every day because, again, we have to bind up these toxins. And so if you're on a statin, we need to maybe be concerned. Is there still an infection that could be causing further problem? Now, I'm not an MD. I'm not telling you to get off your statin, but I just want people to be aware, think about these things. If it resonates with you, maybe doing a little bit more research to really understand that thing. So again, if you're somebody who suddenly has high LDL, think about what is the cause, right? What type is it possible that I have some type of infection? So really important to understand there. So that's big on all the fats here. Let's talk a little bit about some other food things that come up sometimes for people. People talk about oxalates. People talk about, so these are what we typically classify as anti-nutrients. So people in the carnivore world and they talk a lot about vegetables are not good for you. You don't need vegetables because they have all of these toxins associated with them. And every plant does have these defense mechanisms, right? Because they want to survive just like a human wants to survive. So they will give off certain toxins, right, to avoid being eaten by insects or animals or what have you. So that's why sometimes when we eat too many things raw in their raw form, some people who eat raw say, oh, it's great because that's when you get the enzymes. And the enzymes are so crucial for health. But those enzymes can also be toxic in some people. So some people thrive eating raw diet, and a lot of us do not. So again, there is total genetic variability. So I can't say one thing is always better than something else. It's really be interesting to look at your own genetics and just in your own feeling when you try these different things, what feels the best. But you have to do it for probably a month at least to really understand what are the long-term effects of this kind of diet for me. But oxalates, if any of you have ever listened to Dave Asprey, he just hates oxalates because he has a genetic disposition where he cannot process oxalates properly. People who get kidney stones, one form of kidney stones are calcium oxalate stones. So you have to be careful eating too many oxalates. Oxalates are very common in rhubarb, spinach, kale, raspberries, chocolate, beets. So all these things that we think, oh, but those are so good, right? They have all those good nutrients, and there's good and bad in everything. So again, we have to wait and think about how does it affect us. But oxalates bind calcium and they can bind other minerals. As I was saying in the beginning, minerals are so vital to our overall well-being. If we're eating a lot of foods that are binding our minerals, not to mention if we have a lot of infections, they also bind a lot of our minerals, then we may not be getting those minerals in our cells where we need them for all of the special reactions to create energy for us, right? So we have to consider that how well we eat. And that's why you should never eat anything like every day. Every single day, I have the same breakfast, I have the same lunch, I have the same dinner. We need to have a variety of nutrients. Just eating spinach here and there, raspberries here and there. But again, it affects more people who have the problem. And there are certain tests where you can look, organic acid tests will show, how if your oxalic acid is really high. And you can do very affordable now, these genetic testing companies, you can see how well you deal with that. And it may be like, wow, gosh, I have been eating raspberries every single day in my smoothie, or spinach, raw spinach every day in my smoothies, and I'm still not getting better. Maybe I should change it up, right? If you're somebody who likes to have the convenience of a smoothie every day, make sure you're changing it up. Do not put the same things in it every day. Because again, we need that variety. And like I said, if you happen to be one of those people who are sensitive to oxalates and you're using them in your smoothie every single day, you could be creating more inflammation when you think you're doing a really good health thing. Citric acid. This is another really important anti-nutrient, very commonly found in cereals, right? So any kind of grains and legumes, right? Like beans, peanuts. They also can bind minerals. And I see this a lot. I get concerned about this kind of things with tooth decay, right? If we're binding up our minerals, then how are we going to produce healthy enamel? We can't. So excessive grains, which is such a mainstay of our kids' diets today, that it's problematic. So I'm always giving my kids extra minerals because I can't keep them away from the cereals as much as I'd like to. I don't know what they eat at school, and they always come home with snacks and who knows. So Ken, I'm always putting binders in them, and I'm always giving them minerals every single day without fail. Minerals, unless they're hiding them somewhere, which I've found plenty of stashes over the years, but trying to impress on them that this is really important, right? If you're going to go out and you're going to eat your Taco Bell, then at least take your binder and please take your minerals, right? Fat soluble vitamins. So that's what we have to be careful for, because if we're binding up too many minerals, we're going to not be able to make the cells work the way they want to. Another anti-nutrient that you may have heard of are lectins. These are also found in plants, mainly grains. You see this connection here, grains, cereals. They have a lot of these anti-nutrients. The other problem is not only is the anti-nutrients, but a lot of times grains, they are brought in from the harvest and they're stored in these silos for a super long time. And mold can grow in these silos. And mold is just one of the nastiest infections that we can have because it suppresses our immune system. So mold, if you have constant, or you or your child or grandchild has chronic strep infections, that often can be related to mold, right? So the mold is taking over, it's suppressing the body's ability to fight that strep, because we all have strep everywhere in our mouth. It's a common bacteria. So why are some people more prone to getting these constant infections? And then they constantly have antibiotics, which then throws the whole microbiome off in the body, which leads to a whole host of other issues. And mold can be tricky to find, but it's on a simple organic acid test. I run a simple urine tox screen that shows mold toxins. But again, if you're taking a binder every day, you're helping to bind up those. So another thing to think about there. So those lectins, again, as I said, they're in grains or beans, nuts, some shellfish, sometimes potatoes. And again, some people have genetic susceptibilities that they can't digest some of these foods. So again, I'm just going to keep reiterating it. Try to have a variety in your diet. I do think it's important that we have animal protein. Does it have to be every day? No, it doesn't have to be every day. Find some way, because as I said, and if you go on and look at that list, like the science is indisputable. There's so much nutrient density in animal protein, really important. So we've talked about a lot of things. I know I've gone here and there and all over the place, but I hope you can take, oh, there was one more thing I wanted to talk about. When I was talking about seed oils, very interestingly, if you have the right amount of oils in your body, you can actually prevent sunburns. So when I learned this years later, I was like, oh, no wonder. My children, when they were younger, never, ever had sunburns. And I did not slather them with sunscreen because I was so worried about all the toxic chemicals in sunscreen. And if you've seen me, I'm very fair skinned with strawberry blonde hair, blue eyes. And my younger daughter, she has more of the Italian skin, but my older daughter looks very similar to me. And I was always surprised, like first time they ever burned was when we went to the Caribbean. Sun is much, much hotter there. But I always gave them cod liver oil when they were little, almost every day. And I was like, oh my gosh, those omega-3s are really the antioxidant capability of that actually protects the skin. Another nutrient is axanthin, which you find is what causes the pink in shrimp. So that's another really important antioxidant that can prevent sunburn. But again, another little tidbit that I always found interesting. I didn't really realize that. I just thought, wow, they're lucky. So again, the more omega-3s that you have, you're going to be more resistant. Same thing, like a lot of people will come to my office and they don't want to have x-rays because there's so much radiation. Now we have digital, so it's very minimal. But even now, the 3D x-rays are becoming more common, and they do have a little more radiation. So one, we have a special homeopathic we give patients after that if they want, that will help the body remove that excess radiation. But having antioxidants before any kind of x-ray, whether it's a dental x-ray or a mammogram or T-scan, whatever you have to have, bulk up on the antioxidants. So maybe pomegranate juice, anything with the high polyphenols, berries, the richly colored fruits and vegetables have a lot of antioxidants, or you certainly can take a supplement with antioxidants, but that can help mitigate the effects of the radiation and allow that body to flush it out of the system more easily. Lastly, to finish up our nutrition podcast, I mentioned that we want to talk about soul nutrition. So, as I mentioned at the very beginning, if we can be eating all of the best foods and doing all the exercise and the movement, but if we don't have a sense of connection, a sense of purpose, it doesn't really matter. In my opinion and in my experience, it doesn't matter what we're eating, right? The other important thing to mention is how we're eating. I talk to a lot of my patients about this too. So we may have the healthiest smoothie or a great meal with all the nutrients that we need. If we're eating it on the go while we're watching TV, or sometimes I'm guilty of this, I've got so much to do in the middle of the day during lunch. I'm trying to answer all my emails and I'm trying to wolf down my lunch. Like, that's no good, right? We really need to take the time to allow our nervous system to initiate the digestive system to allow us to absorb and assimilate all those nutrients. So please also think about how we eat, not just what we're eating. Okay. So that's why family dinner is so important when we're all together. And we can't necessarily do this 7 days a week. My kids are teenagers now. They've got all the sports all the time. So even if we sit down and again, we're watching a show all together, we're having community. Is it the best? No, but it's better than everybody doing their own thing and again, eating standing up at the counter. We do the best we can in our modern life, but that idea of community, the idea in Europe, right, that everything closes for lunch for hours. People have 2 3 hour lunches and they are sitting around with friends, and they do have less processed food in Europe. They don't allow the chemicals that we allow in this country, but there's a real culture around food and around eating. I read a book once called French Kids Eat Everything. It was a fantastic book. Just the whole sense, like there's an entire committee that meets to think about what the children are going to be eating. These kids in elementary school have 7-course meals. It's fabulous. So they really appreciate food not for just the taste, not the something that have to do 3 times a day, but the whole idea of enjoying our food, allowing us to savor and feel have all those senses engaged is really important. That allows us to get that nutrition down to the cellular level. Another really important thing to think about. And again, other things for that soul nutrition is having those meals with friends, right? Having that community. I was so fortunate recently to see 3 of my best girlfriends all within the span of a week. One lives in Texas, the other one is a couple hours away from me in Massachusetts, and one is about an hour from me. And all in one week, I got to see all 3 of them. And man, did that fill my joy bucket. It's just so amazing how good you feel in the presence of others who can appreciate just sitting and talking and having a meal together, being able to just talk about anything really increases energy levels in people. The whole idea of oxytocin, that hormone, feel good hormone when you are hugged or touched. And again, the more balanced our nervous system is, the better our digestive system works. The healthier our digestive system is, the better our immune system is. Everything works together. So I just want to shout out to my besties, Candace and Heather and Casey, and thank you all for providing me with the soul nutrition. I love you guys. And thank you to my audience here for reaching out and letting me know that this is making an impact for you. It is something that gives me great joy. And I hope to continue this for a long time. A lot to unpack in this episode. I hope you guys learned something. Please know that I am available if any of you have any questions specifically. We put a link in the show notes to my email. I do consultations for patients who are looking for answers about just about anything. So I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I will see you on the next one. Hello, I'm Dr. Rachaele Carver, a board-certified naturopathic biologic dentist and a certified health coach. Did you know that over 80% of the U.S. population has some form of gum disease? Many of us don't even know that we have this source of chronic infection and inflammation in our mouth that's been linked to serious consequences like heart disease, diabetes, stroke, dementia, colon cancer, kidney disease, even pregnancy complications. Would you like to learn how to reverse and prevent these chronic debilitating conditions without spending a lot of time and money at the dentist? Join me for my 6-week course where I will teach you the root cause of disease. You'll learn how to be your own best doctor. Are you ready to get started? Let's go.